All right, I think we can get started.
Okay, everyone. Like I said, this is not going to be but so serious because I'm not very serious, but it is a really important topic. And so today I'm talking about the joy of secondary data analysis. My name is Lynette, Hammond, Gerido. And I happen to do a fair amount of secondary data analysis. But I wanted to talk to you about why I think it's important. I'm trying to hold it against. Okay, so why am I here? One is because I love people more than computers. Okay, and I enjoy the nuances of people. Okay, so that's probably why we're all somewhat in here. Maybe some of us don't like people as much as other things, dogs, I saw it, books, whatever. But at the end of the day, I do like that, and I told Brenda, I was like, I miss you guys, so I'm here for that purpose, and I wanted to really have an opportunity to just talk about this because I know that all of us are going to be doing a lot of these things. The other thing up here is, anyone who follows me on Facebook, you know I love black people. I'm a black person, but it was kind of funny just because I just went out and I picked some people and just kind of showing like some differences in people. And I think like the thing is like anytime you have a big bucket, you can have a lot of subcategories or things like that. And one person could be very different from another person, even within this big bucket. So just a quick run through. Does anyone know who this is? Okay. Her name is, she goes by Sweet Brown. Do you guys remember? Ain't nobody got time for that. That's my, I love her. Okay? I love her. So I think sometimes we have to have diversity on all levels, right? So she may not be like academic or something like that, but she's represented in this population, right? Who's this? Yeah, everybody knows. Anybody know this young lady? Her name's Marley Diaz. Anyone know this lady? Okay. Needy Okora. Yes, she's a sci-fi writer. This guy, this was the podcast I was listening to. Wesley Morris, New York Times culture wwriter. Everybody knows Big O. Okay. You know this guy?
Childish Gambino.
Yes, either or, right? But he's retired from that name. Okay. And the last dude, Cole, right? Okay. So I say this because I'm just using him as an example. But usually, like, we're starting off our secondary data analysis with some kind of descriptive data, right? And if we look at this, I kind of put their names down, and our first pass at it is like, okay, well, how do we describe this population or whatever? We're not even looking at trends at this point. And so I just picked a couple of metrics or descriptors, and do you look in my convenient sample? Okay, of people that I'm just sharing with you. So just at first pass, what are some things that come to mind about this population or this sample? Other than that they're black. Right. So my sample's biased already, right? A lot of them have something to do with writing or literature or things like that.
Arts.
Yeah, no, arts, yeah. What else? Gender. Yeah. That's not too bad of a split. Okay.
Couple of age outliers.
Yeah, age outliers, but really like pretty bad though, because I'm kind of all around my age group, right? So I didn't even realize when I was doing it, but when I looked at it, I'm like, oh wow, this is some serious like sample or implicit bias. So I'm selection bias, you know. So ages. What else? This the birthplace one really like messed me up because I was just like,
Most offer side
right. So I'm from Pennsylvania. Maybe I have a tendency, without even knowing it, to gravitate towards celebrities that are from a certain area or whatever. I don't know. I mean, I have a couple here, but I was like, man, I don't have too much. I mean, Oprah's from Mississippi, right? But did I really have anyone here in the southeastern? You know, no. And so when I looked at that, I was like, oh, these are some things. Other things, like some other interesting characteristics that are left off. You know, there are people from the LGBTQ community. There are people who are dual citizens. There are people who are biracial. You know, there are people who on this that have served in the military. I guess I put that in the occupation. But there are other ways that I could intersect this data and represent these people. And so that's what my big thing is that sometimes anytime we're looking at a population, especially ones that are described in a very large bucket, I think it's always important to go deeper if we can. I mean, you can't always do it, okay? But if you can, kind of go a little bit deeper and start pushing the envelope of the questions that we're asking and the information that we're seeing in front of us. So I'm going to talk quickly about two projects that I've been working on, and two of the projects. The one is we're doing work with the eHealth Lab with the Health Information National Trends Survey data, and that that team. Both of these are kind of team collaboration. So in that team, obviously Dr. Joko is the advisor, but I have a master's level stats student that works on it, and her name is Xiang Tun, and then there's also a undergrad URUP student who's pre-med that works on that as well, and her name is Brittany Ernst. As well as getting some outside feedback from a professor from New York University, Dr. Aisha Langford. So the Health Information National Trends Survey is free, freely available. You can go to hints.cancer.gov and you can look at this survey and download it over many years. It gives you population-based estimates, and it asks a lot of questions that we're interested in terms of health information, technology, and usually the sample size of the survey data is about around 3,000, 4,000, somewhere in between there, people that respond to the survey. Things to keep in mind though when we're doing this, because a lot of times, we get caught up and we want to do like things that we want to kind of figure out cause of issues. These are trends. They emphasize it in the name, the T, the trends, okay? So it can be hard, but that's just something to just remember about the limitation of this, but it's a great resource. They have it for multiple years, and sometimes in different cycles they have different questions asked. Couple hints papers that are of interest. Curtis found this one, I love it. Who goes to the Library for Cancer Information in the eHealth era? So we've been looking at that one because I've been collabing with Curtis and Zoe about some library health information seeking things. And of course, Dr. Lustria and Dr. Hinnett, they have this is a very popular HINTS paper about the digital divide that's describing that. So if you wanted to look those up, they're both pretty interesting pieces. One thing I wanted to talk a little bit about is weighted data. Okay, I showed this. I keep going on about this, right? And a couple of you seen this because we've talked about it in the eHealth Lab, and we also are talking about it in our group because sometimes this is important with dealing with this survey data. They weight the data. So this is the unweighted study sample, and then this is the weight. This black line is what the population should be. And then this is what, after I applied the weighting and redid the statistics of these different age groups, what it looks like then. So the way that they weight the data makes it more population representative of the population. So these demographics then are all showing up there. Anybody have any questions or concerns about weighting the data? Do you see, like in this population, the survey, the people, the respondents, where did they skew? The ones who actually answered it. Yeah, so these are the actual unweighted respondents. So they're skewing around 50 years old, right? So remember my example that I gave? My convenience sample was skewing around that level. So we're looking at, even though we're saying it's population-based data, the sample of respondents are literally skewed towards older. Some people say that's always the case sometimes with surveys. Older populations tend to answer surveys more than others. So there's always going to be some of that. But just to look at this a little bit closer, these are the actual numbers. So when people in this, this is hints for cycle 4, when they were asked what forms of technology they use to exchange medical information with their providers, only 4 people from that 18 to 34 demographic said that they use social media. But that translates into over 400K people, right, once it's weighted. And you can see that there are, that's how you get this number, but you can see how it can become problematic, because here, the 0 means 0, and it still means 0, because I can't do anything for the weighting, right? Yes?
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
There is a very big difference, you can see it, for the age 18 to 34, it's only 4 people using social media.
Mm-hmm.
And comparing to 50 to 64, which is almost 3 times more in there, but comparing that to, to the weighted numbers,
Right.
it's not times 3.
Right, and it wouldn't be, right? Because this is what we're showing. After they weight it, they're going to make these ones come up higher, right? But it still is problematic, right? So kind of like brings these ones down because there are so many of them, and then brings these up. And that's kind of like what the weighting's going to do to make it try to simulate the population, right? But we see that there's still challenges and limitations with that, right? Because of what you're pointing out, right? Literally, this many people answered this question, but once they add their weighting, and they have the whole methodology of how they weight it, and I don't want to necessarily get into that, I just want us to be aware of there can be challenges with the weighted data, right? In how we interpret what's going on. I would say that too, if we know from the study sample that there wasn't that many people in this category, age category, right? And none of them answered that they use video, right? I don't know if that's really true that 0 people in the population in that age category use video, right? So I think that, I'm just saying that we need to kind of challenge it and look at the different things, not only are just initial like selection bias things that we may do, or implicit bias things that we may do for ourselves as human beings, but then looking at even the sample bias, the weighting technique, and things like that with the publicly available data sets that we're using. Because sometimes we're using these to determine representativeness, and we're using them to feel more assured that this is, represents the general population, but based on your research question, it may have some gaps still. So, I guess we kind of talked about those questions here. So the second thing that I work on is and before I go on to the iHub, did anyone have any questions about the hints data set? Hints, health information, that was this stuff. So all that work was from there. And basically what we are looking at on the study that I'm working on with this right now is we're looking at, it asks questions about, are people interested in cancer clinical trials? It asks them if they are interested in participating in collaborative like research and things like that, but then it also asks them questions about diet and nutrition and their family makeup and their income and their information seeking behaviors, and do they trust their doctors, and all these different things that we can kind of look at that. So that's what I'm working on.
So I'm asking about these hints can be more, or is it customized further for any other purpose?
Yeah, I mean, so I think what you're getting at is, could it be used for any other kind of purposes in terms of interpreting like research questions, or could you even use hints to explore,
Yeah.
make your own? So the project that we're working on now too has another component, so it's a 3-phase project, and the second phase of it is that we're looking at the risk information seeking processing model, and that model has certain factors that usually play into whether someone goes and seeks information, right? It describes as been used for, like, sometimes to evaluate the effectiveness of public health campaigns. And when we tried to map the hints questions to the model, we saw that some of the factors in the model just weren't addressed by the hints. And so the third phase of it is then trying to think about maybe doing interviews that have some questions that are similar to hints, but additional questions that would help us be able to actually use that model and learn more about it. And obviously we can't use the hints data for the factors that's not there, but at least with our interview population, we can compare just in general those descriptive sets with this hints population data and see how similar or different it is, and then we can also just learn more about those questions that were not included in hints that we're interested in. So
I'm also concerned about the IRB.
mm-hmm.
Do we have to ask permission?
No, I mean, you can, I have an IRB for this work, but this is publicly available. It's a fact that they say it's de-identified. You're able to use this. It's distributed by the National Cancer Institute. There's no fee for use, and there's no restrictions on use. They have a users group and things like that. So if you look under the facts, under the About Hints section, one of the facts talks about, is this available for anyone to use, and they encourage researchers to use it because they want to get more publications, and there's links to all the publications that came out of it.
I think you sort of addressed one of my questions, which would be, I'm also assuming you've used this often, the hints data, and I'm using it for one of the classes that I'm taking, the STAT class.
Okay.
I found out something. Do you always have to depend on what's available on hints data to design your research questions?
I try not to. I try to design the research questions first and then see if hints is a good candidate of data for it to answer the question.
Yeah, I found out that I had to, redesign my research questions based on what I had available on the hints data.
Yeah.
You know?
I think you're right. I mean, so that's something that, it's like what comes first, chicken or the egg, right? So sometimes you have the research question first and you're like, I'm really interested in this phenomenon. Let me see if this data set can help me explore that or understand it better. On the flip side, while you're doing that, and this has happened too, while you're doing that, you may be like, wow, they asked this question in this data set. I want to now answer a research question related to that. So I'll say with this, so we had something where I was using hints in the fall to deal with, like we said, to the risk information seeking processing model. And then we wanted to get a publication. So secondary data analysis is great for being able to quickly, because you don't have to do the data collection. It's been done for you, and it's great because it's, great use in a large number of people, and sometimes it can reduce your time. I don't think it's like the only method you should be used to, but it can really help you, like in those classes, stat classes and things like that, to learn about these methods of handling the data, cleaning the data, and understanding the limitations of the data, right? And so that when you're designing your own tools or whatever, you're going to hopefully just understand like some of the trade-offs and limitations, and sometimes the hard decisions that you're making. But we shifted gears, so we saw that there was a question. We originally were doing the modeling on the risk model, and we saw that there were some gaps with the factors. We're still working with that, and it was going to take us a little bit longer to try to do some structured equation modeling and things like that. So we saw an easier question to answer with hints because it was more appropriate. It was really a direct outcome about the engagement, patient engagement in medical research. And so we've been working on that as a team.
I also found out that in the data that there were predominantly nominal and categorical data.
Mm-hmm.
Very
Yeah.
few interval data.
Yeah.
Which does not allow for, predictions and all that.
Right, but you can talk about associations, so that's kind of like what you'd end up doing. So in this, in the slide that I was showing you, it's basically, this is some of the category. You can see I did a chi-squared, right, to see so that there's a relation, there appears to be a relationship between age and the mode of channel or technology used to exchange information with a physician, right? And that's all. And even after waiting, it was still there. But that's all we can say, right? You can't say that what causes it. I think you need to rely on some theory. You maybe need to think about opportunities for future studies that will, learn a little bit more. Yeah.
And then
I'm like, Dr. Burnett, jump in anytime on any of this.
Finally, is there any like when you bring secondary data, research based on secondary data versus research based on primary data, is there any scale of preference, maybe in terms of publications and all that?
I think that just going back to your first situation, right? You are using hints, you found that you kind of are limited in what you can answer with it, right? And so as a researcher, you're going to have different questions that, like we were interested in cancer clinical trials participation. Hints for cycle 4 literally has 2 specific questions. And the questions were only asked of people who indicated that they had been diagnosed with cancer. And one was, have you ever heard, or did anyone ever speak to you about a cancer clinical trial? And have you participated in a cancer clinical trial? But if I'm interested in the continuum between awareness and actual participation, then there's a whole empty, spot there. And so I need to think about ways that I would do a better tool. But I definitely encourage, I wish that I did more secondary data analysis earlier on to help me understand that before designing my own tools, right? Because it helped me see like how things were not answering the question, how there's issues. It helped me to be able to visualize and understand biases better. It helped me to understand like what I could get out of the data, and even with a smaller or larger like sometimes there's larger things there. It also, because it's kind of a big data set, we were talking about this. I'll call it argue now. Like, how applicable is it to different, maybe smaller populations, or things like is it limited in like the sparsity of data? All these people don't answer every single question. That's how you can get like a 0, or sometimes you're making hard decisions of saying, well, if the data was missing, what do I put these people with, right? And how do I have to group it? So I feel like it just made me be more forgiving of some of those things, but I also think that it doesn't I doubt that you could just purely do like for your own research or your dissertation pure like total secondary data analysis.
Yeah, I'm thinking at some point you might have to augment, because I was going to ask you, when you found yourself in those situations where the data did not expressly answer all the research questions, did you have to augment at some point?
Well, no, not necessarily, because honestly, that's the other thing. These are like pet projects, so I'm a big time tinkerer. Like, I love to just work. I'm always like, hey, can we work together? Can we do this? Can we collaborate? Because this is how I learn. I learn by applying the information, and so sometimes it just helped me to prepare. So like, I'm like hitting my prospectus on steroids, because I have all these lessons learned from these different things. Like, oh yeah, attempting to use, so in that class, like I guess with the stat class with Dr. Hinnant, I started out with, what is it, BRFSS or whatever, it's the behavioral, it's another health population data set. And I started doing that, and I wanted to answer these questions, and then I went through and I restructured it, and that's, the data cleanup is the hardest portion of it, and trying to make sense of how you're grouping things and how it's going to be, especially like you said, it's a lot, these tend to be very big categorical things. And then I was just like, but I want to know about this, so then I had to switch to Pew. Right? Because I had questions about privacy and internet and things like that. So it was like halfway through that class I had to shift to a whole other data set, and I didn't get to use anything from that data set, but sometimes you can triangulate data sets, and so that can really help, and I'll talk about that in the other thing. But I just say that those exercises, though, really helped me become more confident in understanding, like, okay, when I'm dealing with categorical data, what are the questions that I'm trying to answer, and how do I have to organize it, clean it up, set it up so that I can really try to answer the questions appropriately. And then two, if you're trying, I don't think you should wait to try to get a publication. There are plenty, like that's why I'm showing you, there's plenty of publications on these data sets, and so sometimes it just shortens your the lift of the work, your learning curve. It doesn't mean that it's your only publication, but it's something that you could be like, okay, well, we're going to try for this because I'm going to learn through that publication process, whether it's a publication or a poster or whatever. I'm like the queen of posters, okay? And so do this analysis, show what you see in it, and then get some feedback from folks, and whether it's a podium, whatever, you can do. I mean, if you have the time and the ability to do it or take it out of that class, I think it's important to do it before you get to your dissertation. That's my advice. That's not necessarily everyone's, because when you get to your dissertation, you might be more isolated. It might be your stuff. You want to be more, we're talking about efficiency. I'm all about it. Like, let's be efficient. Let's get this done. Don't waste your time. But give yourself the flexibility when it's not high stakes, right? So it's not high stakes for me to do this. Like, if I find that I did something wrong, then I can just go and redo it. This is not dependent, but I'm also like, it's not saying that I'm just out here like, okay, I'm just whittling this thing and trying to figure out what it's going to turn into. I have questions, we target things, we're looking at different opportunities and saying what types of things are we interested in as researchers could fit with maybe the theme of this conference or the theme of this journal, and then it's like, what tools do I have to do something in twofold? I'm going to, one, try to get some skills, right? Some applied skills, because you hear about these things, and now I'm like, wow, I see it. I see what the challenge is, because now I have my own questions and I'm dealing with this data. And now, to your point, I'm moving forward from that, and now I need to collect my own data. And so how can I try to take some lessons learned from this and build a better instrument or interview questions or whatever to get to my answer. So I'm all about incremental change over time. So that's the hint stuff. And now I'm working in the iHub with folks like, eHub, Innovation Hub or eHub branding, with folks like Castle and Dr. Marty and Dr. Yubo Kuo and Bren Saludo and Ibrahim. What's Ibrahim's last name? Yeah, I'm sorry. I just met Ibrahim this semester, and so we're doing like a kind of like observational ethnographic type style study in there. And so the type of questions that we're interested in is like, what students are using the hub, right? When do they come? Yal's on that project too. Sorry, Yal. He was like, Lynette, you just threw me shade. I'm sorry. That was not intentional, okay? You know I love you. You give me almonds in the evening. It's like, when do they come? Who are they with? And how are they interacting with the technology? And so we've been doing observations of students, and and everybody remembers from qualitative class, it was like, okay, you're sitting back and you're trying to make these observations, and sometimes you're like, those are ethical questions that you're asking, like, what am I really observing here? What am I inferring from this? But it's been cool because I think we've been using it, we've just been collecting it, free fall and whatnot, and Yugo's approach is very grounded, right? Like, so he wants to see the observations and kind of didn't tell us a lot about what we should or should not be doing, just saying like, look, you should be there, just try to figure out what location you're in, and these are like the high level things. And we created an online form, we put some stuff in it regularly, and that way we can just have it time stamped and we don't have to worry about it. And so we started looking at that, and we get to a point of saturation, we've given a lot of information, but now we'll then be transitioning into structured interviews at some point. And so now, but before that, we had an opportunity to look at like some of the data. It was like, hey, you got this turnstile there. Let's look at the turnstile data and just at least get some basic metrics on who's coming in, and you know, what's their academic level. You can get other demographics. So basically, the turnstile, that card swipe, then we can. This is the triangulation with the business intelligence information. Ren was able to pull. I could then group people and then look at times, and these are just entrances, right? And so you can start seeing like what types of people are coming into the iHub, when are they coming in, does that map with what we're thinking, you know, or why they're coming in. These are just academic levels. We were looking at like colleges, and we're looking at, we looked at some ethnicity data. If you look at this very closely, I'm just going to tell you this, my data viz is inaccurate. I've been doing it in R. It has like some issues with the fills. But, so I'm putting that out there. But these numbers in the table are pretty accurate, but they're still represent just literal entries. So what are some of the things that just even looking at that, in this information, like basically leaves you with more questions? So we need to take this data, secondary data analysis, a step further, right? Because right now it's saying that, I guess look, I guess just ask me any question that you have, I'll see if I answer.
I have a question about, so in USA, junior, freshman, senior, so they are different with nurse degree, medicine, and law. So that's
I don't know about nursing. So this is non-degree.
Oh,
Okay.
I know that's not.
Yeah. Those are undergraduate levels.
Yes.
And I guess if they are not in a degree or not matriculated, like maybe they're taking a class or certificate, perhaps, then they may not have a class level or academic level. But it is definitely different between the law and med school at the graduate level, I guess. So
Med school is kind of different with undergraduate students.
definitely.
Med school is a grad
It's
level.
It's a grad level, but it's still, it's even distinct. They're distinct programs.
So did you take out those data which are for staff or?
Good question. And all of the data for staff that are not students was taken out. So you're right, I still need to clean out the people like Ren, who's like the super user has all these entrances, so he's skewing my data, right? So I have to take him out of there. Yeah, you too.
Is there a way to filter out classroom entrances? Because I feel like what I'm seeing is a lot of seniors and juniors entrances, and I feel like those are the students who are taking the classes that is at the innovation hub potentially.
Yeah, unfortunately, and that's where it's limited, right? So I literally only have, did they enter the iHub, right? I don't know if they were here for a tour, were they just going into, they went to the wrong place. I mean, I guess I could test it, like look at the time, between entrance and exit. But the classrooms don't have swipes on them, right? So to get to your question, we probably would have to take it a step further, right? And use some type of qualitative thing or do other type of survey sampling or something like that.
Or we can go for, I think at the hub they have something for the registered classes. Each time of the day they have classes.
Right.
And then
So compare. Well, see now we're getting into issues of privacy. Should I have access to people's class schedule? Is that okay? I mean, we have an IRB for the study as well, but But you're right, that's another level that we could do, like, oh, can we get a report of their registered classes? We would then be able to filter out the ones that are in those class times, and we could make an assumption that if they have these entrances on these days, then they're probably there for class.
So you access to the number of these or the people name and IDs too?
All of that.
All of that.
Yeah, but I de-identify it before I start analyzing, right? Because I don't really, I don't want to have to know about that. But in order to make that triangulation between their card swipe and their demographic or their business intelligence data, we have to map that and then we de-identify it and then kind of aggregate it. But this is what we're working on there. And that's just what we were just talking about. I think that I love mixed method. So I love this idea of having some kind of quantitative secondary data analysis, but also paired with the qualitative, because we can't answer the questions of what technology they're using. So even with the classroom, we know they're in the classroom. Our research question is about how are they interacting with the technology and what levels are they going through in their learning, right? And so we have to then compare that observational data and the interviews that Gal and I are going to be conducting, and then we'll look at themes from that, and then really kind of just put that together and interpret a little bit with the help of the other researchers on the team. And so that type of work takes long, and sometimes it's great if you have the opportunity. Sometimes you don't always have the opportunity. We didn't have turnstiles, right? Or a sign-in or something that we could quantify entrances and associate it with individuals, then we may not necessarily use this for them.
You'd also be collecting the data for everybody who went back to the help desk.
Right. We can, we've been kind of, the help desk is a little bit out of scope for this one, but you're right, yeah, we could
No,
definitely.
it would be in there, that's what I was just saying, you
Yeah.
might need to clean those out too somehow.
Yeah, right, yeah, they just came in and just said this. But in general, for use of the hub, that's great, so when they want to just kind of, who's using it, is it those different schools and colleges, different levels, that's actually a good representation, you have some diversity. And then also what we're able to do is see some pops. I didn't show all of the different way we categorize the data, so sometimes you can see, like, I think we saw, like, in the end of the spring, there were a bunch of engineering students that came in, like, they were the top because they were all trying to finish their projects, and so those are the things, but you need that contextual data to really understand what's going on, right? Because otherwise you might be like, well, dang, the engineers just fell off, they don't come back anymore, but maybe if, you know that, yeah, exactly, you know that, so that's where I think there's a strength in qualitative data analysis. All right, so let's just have a closing discussion, and sometimes why this is important to me, and it's because we see some of these sensational headlines, and we all talk about it from a statistics standpoint and whatnot, but as researchers, I think it's hard because sometimes someone can make this headline out of your research, and you're like, my research didn't say that, or whatever. But this first one is something that's interesting about hints, because a lot of times with the hints data, what you start seeing is odds ratios, right? The odds of something having a whatever. And in this case, this is one that just came out. The odds of dying from accidental opioid overdose in the U.S. surpass those of dying in a car accident. Which is technically accurate. But does one thing have anything to do with the other? No, right? So I guess that's the thing. Like, do you guys have any concerns about that? I just tell you the odds though. So the odds of accidental opioid overdose were 1 in 96, and the odds for a motor vehicle accident were 1 in 103. So it just means that, when you have a lower number, 1 in that lower number means that you have a higher odds of dying in that. But does that seem like it's kind of sensational or misleading? So just when we're interpreting our stuff, I've had people say things to me sometimes, even going back to my I love black people thing. Well, Lynette, you know, the odds something blah 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 black people such and such this. I'm like, are you serious? I was just like, what? I mean, and that may be true because sometimes I am stereotypical, but at other times I'm not. But we're all like very multifaceted, right? And so I just think that for us as researchers and as academics and you know, at a higher level, let's just at least think about it, you know, and kind of inject, like, in a nice way, you know, in a nice way to folks like, yeah, this is, you know, something clickbait. It's going to get you potentially to look at it, but, you know, kind of level it out a little bit and maybe, you know, help some of the people understand it. This one was funny. 8-year study finds heavy French fry eaters have double the chance of death.
Everybody has the same chance of death.
You know? It's like, I'm sorry you're all grim, but what kind of questions do you have when you read that? You know, like, I mean, I think the first question is, you're going to be like, what is heavy French fry eating? You know, what is that? You know, what does that represent? So literally, yeah, there's going to have something, but I think when you really dug into the research, you really had to eat French fries, a certain volume of French fries, more than 3 times a week over a certain period in your longevity of your lifetime, which is kind of like, I mean, hey, I know some people that were vegetarian, that they really just ate potatoes all the time.
You know what, I feel personally
Oh, sorry, I put you on the spot again. Okay. Right. No, this is a safe space. Okay, sorry. French fries are welcome. I had some for breakfast, but I won't eat them more than 3 times this week. But yeah, so they have that, and then same thing like this, like even in sometimes things that are not of a health related thing, it's just like 58% of our youth is unemployed. That came out that they had to really like retract that and back that up because it was just not accurate. Okay, so any thoughts on these things or headlines that you've seen yourselves that were interesting?
So even though if we don't find anything that's scientifically useful, we can just publish it on newspaper.
You may not. You may or may not. I don't know, but what do you mean by scientifically useful?
I don't know. I mean, like I do what I do.
Yeah.
These are from published research. I mean, no, these are news articles. So see, the thing is, when we're putting out our study findings, which may be statistically significant or interesting or whatever, it can be twisted potentially, or it could be misunderstood, you know, from a layperson. So that's the other thing that I'm very interested in is my research topic is how health information is used by consumers to make medical decisions. And so this is technically a form of consumer health information, right? Because they're not going to have the same educational background, and like we talked about, that HINTS is going to show that they may use these periodicals or these news outlets to get health information to a layperson who may not be trained to ask the same questions. That could be challenging and problematic. The research is genuine. I just read you the stats. It is true, you know, that you do have a higher, it surpassed it, but what it's not doing is giving it like the weight, like it's saying, okay, it was out of 96 people versus 103 people, right? 1 in 96 versus 103. That's not, you know, whatever. So when you say it like that, it's kind of, and when you frame, it's all about risk messaging, framing, right? When you frame your message in that way, it creates a fear because people are like, oh my gosh, people are overdosing, they're doing all this stuff, but is it true? You know, that it is true, it's to some degree, but is the difference between that and car accidents that great? So I would say your research, you should be trying to tackle some kind of research that's of interest and to you. When you're going to publish or you're going to attempt to get published, that's going to probably be dictated by some of the trends and things, interests of the organization or things like that. So somebody once told me, you can have whatever research interest that you want, but you should make sure that you at least are aware of the things that people are interested in learning more about. Doesn't mean that you have to change your research interest, but just think about how it maps to some of those areas of interest if you're being strategic about publication. And then you also, I think, need to really consider about the value of what it is that you're contributing to, you know, the field through the study, right? So, yeah, so my bias is, no, you can't just put out crap. But the truth is, you can put out crap, and you will read a lot of crap, you know, it just, you know, it just depends.
I was thinking maybe it relates to the term that they are trying to use it as translational thinking. They want to translate, you know, the academic and research-based results into more in a way that people which are less educated or they do not want to a lot of effort for understanding the news.
Yeah, but that causes you to misunderstand.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
This is the problem with the translation.
they're just trying to, no, they're trying to sell. That's what
You say
they're doing.
lines.
It's all about advertising, you know, and so most people think, I don't know whether this is true or not, most people think that more people die in car accidents than any other, from any health-related cause, right? So when you say the odds of dying from accidental opioid overdose are greater than those of dying from a car accident, then everybody's gonna pay attention and they're gonna buy the product that was advertising this. I mean, that's why that kind of headline appears.
And I think to your point, I think that's part of the challenge too, when I was reading about this whole idea about so public health campaigns and things like that often are trying to influence behavior, right? But they're also trying to get funding, they're also trying to make a case for why it's an issue, right? And so that's why you see some of the people who are in that type of marketing, they talk about the fact that, sometimes you're making your disease or health issue the worst thing possible, right? So that people will pay attention to it, and it's unfortunate, but that's the model that a lot of people are using in terms, and because it's effective, right? It gets the attention of the whole public on certain issues, and says, okay, now we need to rally behind this because whatever. The challenge is that we know how in media sometimes that the problems with that sensationalization, and then also too, like with the overall agenda committee, is it, how are we going to translate those findings into whatever we talk about, the big picture is the social justice or the population-based health change or reduction of the disparity that we see. So I think we're challenged with that in two different ways. But I think that there's a dance that's played, and it's not just private. Sometimes it is public. In terms of us, you're trying to get funding, you're trying to do different things. I think that it's these are some of the ethical challenges that we're all faced with as researchers. And also understanding, how people are going to use your findings, and so, that can be difficult. What happens if you have a foundation that has a lot of funding for a pretty rare disease, and you do a study and you find out that there's a great income disparity, and the folks should have access to more support financially. But your mission of your foundation was never to directly support the people. So now you're in an ethical conundrum, right? Like, do we publish these findings and then be called to task for whatever? I think probably you should. Maybe your agenda mission needs to change a little bit, or you have to find some ways to do that. But, sometimes people are not going to do that, and they'll say, well, from a standpoint of our organization, this is not our That was never our goal. That was never our goal. It was never our mission. It was never what we were established. And that's kind of fair too. You know, I don't know how you judge those things, but anyway, those are my thoughts. Thank you all so much for listening to me ramble about this stuff. Let's be better, more thoughtful researchers and human beings.